Good morning and welcome to the National Press Club, the place where news happens. I'm Eileen O'Reilly, Managing Editor of Standards and Training at Axios and a former National Press Club president. I'm excited to be here with you all today for this important discussion. On August 11th, President Trump declared a crime emergency in the District of Columbia and took control of the Metropolitan Police Department. Since then, thousands of National Guard members and federal officers have been part of the White House's crackdown on crime. With the 30-day public safety emergency expiring last week, there has been a flurry of legislation reshaping public safety in the district. More than a dozen bills were considered by the Committee on Oversight and Government Reform, and just yesterday, 4 of those advanced to the House Rules Committee. Among the measures were lowering the age that juveniles can be tried as adults to 14, abolishing the Judicial Nomination Commission, rolling back restrictions on police vehicle pursuits, and more direct federal control over the district's criminal legal system through the D.C. Crimes Act. During the period of federal control, Metropolitan Police officers were directed to work with ICE and other immigration agencies to run immigration status checks during routine traffic stops. Mayor Bowser pushed back strongly, stating last Wednesday, quote, "Immigration enforcement is not what MPD does, and with the end of the emergency, it won't be what MPD does in the future," end quote. In response, President Trump posted yesterday on Truth Social that he will call a national emergency once again in Washington if local police do not cooperate with the immigration enforcement. This could mean a return to federal control of the city soon. But as all of us who live in this region know, residents of the city have been calling for greater self-governance even before the president's recent actions. In 2016, 79% of voters cast votes in favor of statehood. Currently, Washington, D.C. has limited autonomy through the Home Rule Act passed in 1973, but Congress reviews all legislation passed by the Council of the District of Columbia before it can become law, and retains authority over the district's budget. That brings us to our guests. Joining us this morning is Ankit Jain, one of Washington, D.C.'s shadow senators, an elected official who advocates for D.C. statehood and full voting rights in Congress, but does not hold a seat or voting power in the Senate. Also with us is Christina Henderson, an at-large member of the Council of the District of Columbia. Thank you both for being with us here today. I have several questions that have already been emailed in. If you are in the audience and have any questions, please write them in the card and hand them to our staff. I will ask as many as I can. This brings me to my first question, and I'd like you both to answer, if possible. Governance of DC seems to be at a precipice right now. Can you each briefly describe the importance of this moment in time? Like, give us a big picture overview. Do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you to the National Press Club for having this important conversation, because I do feel like we're at an inflection point. I often say that DC is in many ways the petri dish for the federal government for a variety of different things. Even in some of the topics that we're going to talk about, such as bail reform, for instance, Congress tried out their idea or their changes on bail reform on the district first before they passed the federal law. And so when we're always talking about home rule and statehood and those types of things, my message, though, to the rest of the country and other cities and jurisdictions is you have to watch what happens in D.C. because it could be coming to your city next, which is exactly what we have seen happen after the federal emergency that was imposed here in the district. Very quickly, the president talked about taking this to other cities, Chicago, Baltimore, I believe Memphis, Tennessee is now in the crosshairs of this type of, I think, intrusion upon local government. And so I think that this is super important because you're starting to see a consolidation of power in a way of what does it look like to be authoritarian in a city where you have 700,000 people who are paying taxes but don't actually have a vote or representation or an ability to participate in the way that they are being governed.
I agree with everything that Councilmember Henderson said, and also want to thank you for having us. I'm actually a former member of the National Press Club, a student member, but I was a member back in the day, so it's great to always be at the Press Club.
Welcome back.
Thank you. And so I think what we're seeing is the greatest attack on home rule since we got home rule in the first place. And that starts today with the vote in the House. And what we've seen is we saw the president, it's really the next stage in the president's attempt to take total control over Washington, D.C., is the way I'm looking at it. So we saw it start with the president trying to change how the law is enforced. He took control over MPD. He has sent all these federal agents in to change how the law is enforced. Now we reach phase 2, which is changing our laws themselves. And so we have to stop this Trump takeover from happening, succeeding in Washington, D.C., because as Councilmember Henderson said, this is a first, they're starting here in D.C. because it's easy. We're not a state. They can easily use us as a testing ground for their far-right agenda, how they would run cities if they had control over them. But if they succeed here, they will see that this works. Let's go to Memphis. Let's go to Chicago. Let's go to Phoenix. Let's go to Philadelphia. And they're going to come to the next cities next. And so we need to stop this Trump takeover in Washington, D.C. today, starting today with this votes in the House. And I guess my question would be, I don't understand why any Democrat would vote to support the president's authoritarian takeover of Washington, D.C. It might sound like, oh, it doesn't matter to me, but like I said, your city could be next. And if this succeeds, Republicans will realize that this is an issue that unites their party and divides the Democratic Party, and they'll keep on pushing. And we can stop that from happening by uniting the Democratic Party to vote no on all of these bills, because they can't pass these bills through the Senate without getting Democratic Senate support. And so Democrats have the ability to stop this from happening, and it is so important for us to make sure that we prevent these attacks from succeeding, because it is an attack on home rule itself, and it's just the first start in a longer plan.
And how do you think we should stop that from happening?
Well, I think we can stop these bills from passing, right? I think they're holding a vote in the House. The Republicans control the House. I think we probably all know the outcome is going to be in the House. But the Senate is still a jump ball. And so if these bills can be, we can defeat these bills in the Senate, that is a way for Republicans to realize this is not an issue that's going to get them political juice, and they'll move on to the next issue. And so I'm really worried if it succeeds, that it's just the start of a longer plan, is what I would say.
Mm-hmm. So there's a question from the BBC who says, what do you think the end game in DC is for the Trump administration? Do you think is this what you're talking about?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is what I'm talking about. And I'll give another further example, right? So DC's appropriation, or our budget, has to go through the Congress. And through the appropriations process, there are always these additions called policy riders. They only apply to the District of Columbia, though. And there have been riders for decades on a variety of different things to say we can't spend local dollars to do something. So for instance, we couldn't spend our local dollars to do needle exchange. We can't spend our local dollars on abortions. And now, in this most recent appropriations bill that has gone through the House of Representatives, they've added 24 other things that just delve deeply into what I would consider municipal decision making, not something for a member of Congress who's supposed to be focusing on the federal level. Like DC can no longer ban right turn on reds. I don't know why this is such an important factor for a congressman from Pennsylvania, but he feels very strongly about it because he keeps bringing it up. No right turn on reds. We can't do automated traffic enforcement. And so then you have to start to question, is it going to go deeper? Mm-hmm. Are you now going to say, okay, the Congress gets to decide what the curriculum can be in DC public schools? You can't teach this, you can't do that. And it chips away at what it looks like to be able to have local residents be able to control their own destiny and how they are governed overall. And so, I don't have a crystal ball in terms of the Trump administration piece, but I do know that when you don't have the opportunity to exhibit, I think, real power, and I would say this is more for the Congress than I would say for the Trump administration, right? To the point of how do you get 14 bills all related to DC getting through the House of Representatives? Well, when you have given up your power to legislate, when you have given up your power to conduct any oversight, because now you're saying whatever the administration wants to do is okay, when you have given up your ability to actually craft meaningful solutions to address the concerns of the majority of the American people, right? Grocery prices, gas prices, the availability of affordable housing. These are all things that they should be spending their time on. But today, we have a bill that says in the District of Columbia, 14-year-olds can now be tried as adults for criminal matters. Why are members of Congress from Arizona, Nevada, Oklahoma, Florida spending so much time focused only on DC? And part is because we are like your easiest, we are your easiest target to actually accomplish, because to do something bigger would actually take more time, more thought, and a more desire and will from the rest of the members of the House.
Yeah, I mean, I just add that I do think his ultimate goal is to run DC in line with his far right values and agenda, the president and the members of Congress who are advancing the president's vision. So they are trying to turn DC into a laboratory for how would you run a city if far right Republicans controlled it, right? And so
without the voters, to
without
be
the
clear.
voters, yeah. I mean, it's not, the problem is that they don't have this kind of support in cities, and so they can't do it by winning elections. And so in those cities, what they can do is they can use DC's unique status. I think of us as almost a colony of the federal government, and they can they can run DC in line with the way that they think cities should be run, as kind of like a look. Here's how it can be done as an example for the rest of the country. And because we're not a state, they can do these kinds of things to us very easily. But there are ways for them to do it to other cities too. For example, they are trying to pull all funding, some funding, transportation funding, some funding source from every city or state that has sanctuary policies. And I can see that in a variety of different cases. If you have certain criminal justice laws that the Republicans don't like, then we're going to pull your police, federal police funding. We're going to pull your federal health funding if you allow for abortion and stuff like that. And so, if they succeed here, then they're like, okay, let's. It's worth the effort to go for the next one, the harder path of having to now pull funding rather than in DC. They can just change the laws entirely. And I would be remiss if I didn't say that this is exactly why we need DC statehood, because it's so wrong to have people who don't represent us, who don't share our values, who don't know anything about us, writing laws for us. And we fought a revolution to end exactly that practice. And here we are almost 250 years to the date, and we're still facing the exact same consequences, the exact same problems in our capital city. What did we fight a revolution for? It is exactly to avoid these kinds of things that we're seeing right now, that the bills the Congress is voting on right now.
Mm-hmm. And what about the idea that DC is bigger than a regular city because it's the nation's capital? There's more of an onus to make sure that it's amazing and the best it can possibly be. Like, is there any validity to that argument?
I mean, so I'll just start. I'll just say that every other democracy in this world has figured out how to give its residents of its capital city voting rights and self-government, and they, the world has not fallen. Those countries are doing just fine. And so if the UK can do it, if London can have voting rights, if New Delhi can have voting rights in India, if Paris can have voting rights in France, then there's no reason that Washington, D.C. cannot have voting rights and full representation in the United States of America. This argument that there's something special about Washington, D.C., it just doesn't make any sense. There's no logic behind it. Every other country has managed to make it work, so why can't we?
He said it.
Great. Well, let's look at a little bit into crime in DC. A question from BBC News for Councilwoman Henderson. Do you think the City Council bears any responsibility for perceptions that DC was not being tough on crime beforehand, I guess?
So I think that there are certainly misconceptions around what the council does not do, what they control and do not control, and the caricatures, right? We are the punching bag when we think of DC government, which we can sort of accept. But what I would say is this: as with any legislature, we have the opportunity to evaluate whether or not a particular law is working, and if it's not, we can amend it and make changes, which we have done. One of the bills that the House is voting on today is around law enforcement vehicular pursuits. So you can do a chase, those kinds of things. Mm-hmm. The misconception on the House is that the council has banned all vehicular pursuits, which is actually not true. Mm-hmm. We changed the law to allow for vehicular pursuits in certain circumstances with guardrails and oversight. Mm-hmm. What they would be doing on the House side is to take all of that away. And interestingly enough, we actually have an example of what happens in that case. So when the president signed the executive order back in early August, the U.S. Park Police started to allow their officers to do vehicular pursuits. Well, since August 11th, they have had, I believe, 10 pursuits, and 6 have ended in crashes. That's 60%. When we're talking about these types of things around, like, it sounds like a great idea in theory, but when we're looking at an urban city such as ourselves and we actually have to get down to the crux of the issue, what have we done? We've passed a litany of bills since I've been a council member that are specifically addressing a variety of things, whether it be carjackings, changing offenses, ghost guns, high capacity magazines. Like, the thing though that I feel like some people have a disconnect about, and I feel very strongly on, is as a legislator, right, I don't have a badge. Mm-hmm. I don't have the ability to stop anybody, to question anyone, to give out any tickets, to arrest anyone. There is another part of the government that works in terms of implementation. And I feel like every day we have been working incredibly hard. And you know what? The data speaks to that. Because at the time that the emergency was declared, DC violent crime was at a 30-year low. We did have a problem during the pandemic. And we have worked in terms of legislation and oversight and implementation to reduce that. And so I think that, that is part of the legislative process. If something is not working, you have the ability to review it, address it, amend it, and move forward in a different direction.
Okay. Somebody else asked that though crime rates were falling before Trump's actions, we have seen a sharp decline in certain kinds of crimes since the deployment. Even in areas of the district the guardsmen didn't patrol, a trend that has been welcomed by some DC residents. What steps can DC take to ensure there isn't a rebound in crime rates once the deployment ends?
I mean, so I have a few ideas. I know the question is about DC, but I have a few ideas for the federal government that they can do if they want to make this a long-term, long-term reduce crime in DC. Mm-hmm. So many people don't know that the federal government already controls a large part of our criminal justice system. They appoint every single one of our local judges. They prosecute every adult crime. We don't have a local attorney for adult crime. And they are also, you have the park police and organizations like that control our federal parkland, which is most of the parks in DC are actually federal parkland. Mm-hmm. And so if they cared about reducing crime long term, we have a judicial vacancy crisis in DC. About 1 out of every 5 lower court seats and 2 out of 9, I believe, or 2 out of 7 Court of Appeals, our highest court seats, are sitting vacant because the president has not nominated and the Senate has not confirmed the nominees to fill those seats. And what happens when you don't have judges, enough judges? It means that cases get delayed. Mm-hmm. And when cases get delayed, people who have committed a crime are out, to potentially commit other crimes. Or if they didn't commit the crime, they have this hanging over their head. There's no certainty, there's no accountability, and then memories, grow dim, evidence gets stale, and you lose convictions. And if we want to reduce crime, we need the judges to convict people who commit crimes. And so that's entirely the responsibility of the federal government. We can't do anything about that. The one thing we can do, we have a judicial nomination commission, which they are trying to get rid of in one of these bills. They have actually forwarded a list of judges for every single opening in the court system right now. And so all we need the president to do is pick from those lists and for the Senate to confirm. And in the past, they said, it takes up too much floor time in the Senate. We don't have time to deal with this with every other nominee we have to confirm. They actually just changed the rules in the Senate to allow for nominees to be confirmed in batches. So we have, I think there's probably like 40 or so judges. They could put all 40 of those up for a vote at once, and that would take like 1 day of floor time from them. And so there's no reason they can't do it anymore. There's no more excuses. They can nominate and confirm our judges. That's the number one thing they could do. The U.S. attorney, her name is Jeanine Pirro, appointed by President Trump. She went on Fox News a few weeks ago and is basically begging people to apply to work for her office. And why is that?
Oh, they fired everybody.
Yeah.
Her predecessor.
Her predecessor, also a Trump appointee, Ed Martin, fired over 20 hardworking attorneys whose only crime was prosecuting violent January 6th insurrectionists. So they could hire those people back. They haven't gotten offers back. And so there are some things the federal government could do to help us. I mean, they're spending over $1 billion a day, over $1 million a day just on the National Guard. That's not even including the federal agents. And so if they could give us $1 million a day, there's a lot of things we could do to reduce crime long term. To the degree that people think that this deployment is reducing crime, if you gave me $2 million a day, I could take actions that would reduce crime, right? And so what will happen once these agents go away? Because my guess is that they're not going to be spending like $1 to $5 million a day on DC for eternity. Are we going to have a criminal justice system that is better able to prosecute violent criminals? Will we have invested in the communities that have the highest crime rate in reducing the conditions that cause crime? No, none of these things, long-term problems, will actually have been solved. And so I think there's a lot of things that we can do to solve crime long-term, and none of what the president is doing or what the Congress is trying to do actually would address those problems.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that I think there's certainly work that we need to do on the local level in terms of recruitment and retention of officers. The retention piece being especially important because we get some good officers, we'll train them, and then other jurisdictions right in our region will poach them. So we need to be able to hold on to our folks, and that's something that we need to do as well. But again, we were making investments and changes. There is, again, to Ankit's point around like some other things that the federal government can do. There's one that like, it just boils me. So pretrial services, this is the agency that is responsible for any individual who's released pretrial after being charged with a crime. Okay, pretrial services agency is also a federal agency, right? So now you have somebody who you believe has a crime. You're supposed to have this agency that's monitoring them. What people don't realize is that pretrial services only monitors the individuals who've been released pretrial during normal business hours. That's correct. Normal business hours, Monday through Friday. So if I am somebody who has committed a crime and you're released me pretrial, and you're saying that I'm being monitored, but I realize, if I leave my house because nobody is actually monitoring my GPS monitor in real time, and MPD probably won't find out about it for approximately 2 more days, then I can go do another offense and then do something else. Interestingly enough, that's actually not what has been happening. 92% of the people who have been released pre-trial in the district don't commit a new offense while they're out. But there are lots of different things that the federal government can do to engage on this particular issue. And I do feel like it is not just in terms of the government, there's also more investments that we need to be making in terms of community, especially if we're gonna talk about how we help support our young people to make sure that they're not making decisions that they will regret for a lifetime.
Okay, so question for Senator Jain. In August, you appeared on ABC News and highlighted DC's judicial vacancy crisis, as you just did right now, as the city waits for Congress to fill the longstanding void as Superior Court judges. Yesterday, the House Committee on Rules considered the District of Columbia Judicial Nominations Reform Act of 2025. How do you think federal oversight of the judicial system in DC would affect residents, like if that's passed?
Yeah, so the only ability we have to influence who our judges are in DC is this Judicial Nomination Commission, which is made up of appointees from the president, from the mayor, a couple different sources. I think council might have an appointee or two. And so what they're trying to do is strip even that limited authority that we have over our judges away from us. And why are they doing this? The president wants to nominate extreme right judges to fill the seats in DC. I mean, in his press conference, he said announcing this takeover, he said he had some Bondi-approved judges that he had on his mind. And so it just goes to show, I mean, like, in any other jurisdiction in this country, the judges for that, the local judges for that jurisdiction are selected by people accountable to the residents of that jurisdiction. And we don't have that, but at least we have some sort of accountability through the Judicial Nomination Commission. And so what they're trying to do is take away any sort of accountability from the people of DC over who our judges are. And who our judges are, like, that matters a lot, because judges set, determine whether the law, how the law is enforced. And we, as the people of DC, should have a say on who our judges are. What they're trying to do is take that away from us and say only the president can decide who our judges are. And if you look at who he has appointed to the federal courts, those are the kinds of people we're going to be getting for our local courts if he has a say. We're going to get like the Dale Ho's and the Naomi Rao's of the world, except for the DC local court. Those are the kinds of people the president wants to appoint, and it would be a disaster for DC. It would be yet another attack on our home rule, yet another attack on our democracy. Rather than trying to take away what limited rights we do have, the House should be voting on the Delegate Norton's DC statehood bill, H.R. 51, to give us full rights as residents of this country, as tax-paying American citizens, over both our judges, over our local laws, over our prosecutor. That should all be under local control. And at the very least, we can't go backwards. And that's exactly what this bill would do. And so I guess I would ask, we have almost every single Democrat in the Congress on the DC statehood bill. And even if we don't, most of them at least support some idea of DC sovereignty. Why would a Democrat want to give President Trump the authority to appoint more judges? I don't get that. Why would a Democrat want to support the President Trump attempt to take over Washington, D.C.?
Can I add to this,
Yeah.
Eileen? Because I think it's very easy for folks to look at things in sort of just discrete pieces. But when you look at it compounded, right? So yes, you have this piece of legislation to get rid of the Judicial Nomination Commission, which, to be clear, the Judicial Nomination Commission is not the reason why we have a vacancy crisis. The reason we have a vacancy crisis is the United States Senate. Let's put that to the side, my former employer. The Judicial Nomination Commission is really trying to determine, number one, are you qualified? And number two, do you have a connection to DC? Because the worst thing that we could have happen is to have a bunch of judges who don't actually live in the district making determinations about civil and criminal penalties here in the District of Columbia. You have no connection, no accountability, no peace. But what I said about thinking about it compounded, there's another bill that was approved by the House Oversight Committee that would change the Attorney General position for the District of Columbia from an elected one to one that is appointed by the president without Senate confirmation. So now we're getting rid of the ability to have any influence on judges, the little one that we have, and now you want to pick the Attorney General without the Senate even saying anything. So when you think about it in the totality, that allows for the President of the United States to become the chief legal officer of the District of Columbia. You will pick all the judges. You will pick the prosecutor, the U.S. Attorney's Office for Adult Crimes. You would pick the prosecutor for all civil matters, including juveniles. The only place where district residents would have an opportunity to have a voice in the public safety and criminal justice system would be through the jury. And if they had a way to get rid of us on that, they probably would try. Because so far, they have not been that successful on grand juries in some of these cases here with DC residents. And so I think when you have to think about it in the totality, right, it's not just, the JNC probably seems to some people like, oh, that's not that big a deal. But when you start to layer, now you have authoritarianism, right? And I wouldn't even, I don't care if it's President Trump, I don't care if it was Barack Obama. I don't feel like the President of the United States should be picking the Attorney General of a city, or any jurisdiction, a city, a state, or otherwise, because there are some cases where we do have to sue the federal government, like we are seeing happening in terms of funding and grants and those kinds of things. There are some instances where we, as the city, we have to sue private entities. Why should the executive of the federal government be able to make that determination without any consideration for how it is impacting the actual residents on the ground? So I want people to think about it. It's not just this one-off. There's a lot of moving parts here that, if he is successful, would be the largest power grab in history for an American city.
you have any thoughts about the AG?
No, I think she said it all.
Yeah.
Delegate Henderson.
That was several people sent in questions about that too, so it was definitely on people's minds. I have somebody who wrote in, Sean Charles Dunn was filmed throwing a sandwich at a federal law enforcement agent on August 11th. He has since been fired from his job and charged with misdemeanor assault. Dunn's trial is set for November, with his conviction set a precedent for residents resisting federal occupation.
Well, he was certainly overcharged, but he was charged with a felony for throwing a sandwich. I mean, give me a break. And so he was certainly overcharged, and that was one of the cases where the grand jury agreed with us, and they said, that's ridiculous. We're not going to indict for that. I mean, there's a saying, you can't indict a ham sandwich. I guess you can't indict a Subway sandwich either. Sorry, I had to say that one. And so he wasn't indicted for that, and they had to go down to the misdemeanor charge. And so I'm thankful that the jury, the people of DC, realized that was a huge overcharge. I mean, if you throw a sandwich at a federal officer, probably there should be some consequences. What they should be, I'll let the jury figure that out. But I will say that I think that people in DC are very upset that that these officers are coming. It kind of feels for a lot of people like an occupying army, right? These people are being sent in without are requesting them and not to help us. They're not doing this for DC. They're doing it to DC. You look at the president's press conference and all the statements. Why does he care about this? He says, it's because of the tourists who are coming into DC. It's because I want to put on a good show for the Prime Minister of Denmark or whoever. You had one of the main, most prominent commentators, Republican commentators, Scott Jennings, go on CNN and say, I don't care what the people of DC want. I'm doing this. We should only care about what the tourists want. And I mean, that's so wrong that you're doing policy, making policy not for the people who actually live there, but for people who are going to visit there on their summer breaks. And that's exactly what this is all about. And so I think people feel a little bit like an occupying army, and there's a little bit of anger there, and that kind of like reflected the anger that people have towards DC. Of course, I don't condone throwing any sandwich or anything else at a federal officer, but it is like how people are feeling, I guess is what I'd say.
Yeah, I think one of the things that has come sort of out of this federal surge that we haven't heard a lot about are what are the actual charges. Mm-hmm. So the White House has been putting out this data and information talking about the number of arrests that have occurred, right? And then there's also sort of, if you go to the NPD website, there's a daily dashboard that will tell you the number of arrests that have taken place. After the first weekend of the surge, they stopped telling us what they were charging people for. The only thing they will tell us now is how many firearms that were recovered. The other very important piece of information that they're not mentioning is how many of these cases have gone no paper. Meaning the U.S. Attorney's Office, after reviewing the evidence, is like, okay, yeah, we can't actually move forward on this because, I don't know, we violated your rights on a body camera, which has happened a couple of different times. And that's the unfortunate thing, and it's something that I warned about at the very beginning. When you have a lot of federal agents who are not used to doing this type of daily street cop work, if you will, they're not being trained in this, that's when you get mistakes that are being made. And there was one particular case where, yes, there was an individual who was carrying 2 illegal firearms. That is a case that could have moved forward, but for the fact that the search was done illegally by the federal agents. And so the case had to be dropped. And so I'm interested to see, of the 2,000 people that you've arrested, how many of them are you actually moving forward with charges? Because there have been cases of people who have been arrested for selling water on the National Mall without a permit. I don't know that a jury is going to convict for that, not in DC. But now that individual now has an arrest record that is going to stick with them. And one of the bills that the House is currently considering, not today, but one of the ones that the House Oversight Committee did, which would be to repeal our laws that allow for people to seal their records when there has been no conviction attached to it. As you all know, right, arrest records or just any record, it impacts employment, it impacts housing, it impacts future educational opportunities in terms of financial aid and otherwise. And so this federal surge and all of these arrests are going to have, repercussions for individuals down the road. And now we have members of Congress who are saying, you're going to have to stick with that, regardless of whether or not, it is a legitimate charge. And so that's something that I'm certainly going to be looking at as we kind of go forward. How many of these 2,000 people did you actually go forward with prosecuting? And what were the outcomes? And I hope that members of the press don't lose sight of those questions, because you got people being charged for like riding a dirt bike in the park. Okay, perhaps that is against the law, but is that really a violent crime, which is what all of this was predicated upon reducing crime.
Right. There's another kind of angle to this, I think, that somebody wrote in about the impact on the perception of the MPD itself.
Oh, yeah.
In the largely Latino neighborhood of Mount Pleasant, signs have reportedly appeared cautioning residents not to speak to MPD and to treat local police as if they were ICE agents. Have DC residents lost faith in the MPD? And if so, what can be done to rebuild trust, with Trump threatening to declare yet another emergency to start that cooperation up again?
Yeah, it's really unfortunate. And when I have conversations with some officers who are truly committed to community policing, they will tell you they have been set back years and even decades in some neighborhoods in terms of the relationship building because of this federal surge. When the president talks about the cooperation between MPD and ICE, what people don't realize of what was actually happening on the ground. You would have someone who would call 911 for a call for service for actual something. MPD officer would arrive, and then there would be an ICE agent who was sitting in the same vehicle who would also pop out. And so now what you have is a situation that has been escalated, where I called you perhaps for a domestic violence incident, and now someone is being hauled off for immigration enforcement. And what happens in that is a chilling effect. Now we have whole communities who they're not going to call 911 for very legitimate reasons because of fear of immigration enforcement. And even though we have asked repeatedly for our federal agents, number one, please wear identifying information. Don't just say police. What agency are you with? Number two, do not cover your face. These are things that have not been adhered to. And I think for the majority of folks at this point, right, because we had sort of the alphabet soup of law enforcement officers, they're just viewing everybody one and the same, because you would have situations where you would call for one, and then you would have 14 federal agents who would show up for the same particular incident. And I remember this actually was a situation that happened one morning in Ward 4 where I live, where I got a call and had to sort of drop everything and go up to a school where there was a neighbor who had called for 911. Several federal agents also responded to the call because I believe they're listening in on the transmission lines. And then they ended up setting up an impromptu checkpoint 1 block from an elementary school, 1 block from a middle school, 1 block from a high school, asking people for their ID and trying to talk to kids. So now you have everybody, neighbors who are coming out of their house, filming, teachers who are trying to walk kids to school, trying to alert some families, like go a different way. And so what started off as a very beautiful morning has now devolved into chaos. And now we have neighborhoods like in Mount Pleasant where they have a walking bus to school because families don't feel safe. We hear lots of conversations about, right, Black families, white families now walking Latino children to and from school just to keep them safe because their families don't feel comfortable doing that. That's what it's doing in neighborhoods and communities. And a lot of people feel like MPD, which had this wall for a long time of we don't do immigration enforcement, when they were forced to now do that, I think it's going to take us a long time to unbraid it for some folks, because in their minds, it's one and the same, even though we know that's not what it's supposed to be. You know, Department of Homeland Security got, what, $75 billion additional dollars out of that one big, beautiful bill. I still cannot believe that they actually called it that, but nonetheless, that is what it's called. DHS got $75 billion. Why do you need local law enforcement to do your job for you? Apparently, you got 30,000 people who have submitted applications to become ICE agents. Like, do your own work. Use your own resources, but don't create this wedge in local communities such that if there's a fire, we have people who are just, they're going to be too scared to call 911 because they think ICE is going to come and take away their neighbors. That's what we have come to in the district.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I'll add is that really, people are really scared, especially in the Latino community in DC. People are terrified. And one of the biggest effects of this action by the president, this takeover of DC by the president, is the terrorization of the Latino community. And it is clear at this point that they are racially profiling Latinos. I mean, there's really no argument you can make against that. They see a Latino person who's driving a work vehicle or wearing work clothing, and they arrest first and ask questions later.
And the Supreme Court
Yeah.
has said
That's
racial profiling
is
is okay.
I thought that was a despicable opinion, by the way, by the Supreme Court. And so, like, people who have, like, fully legal, even citizens, are really scared because they are Latino, and because of the way they look, they could get picked up for no reason. Even if they're released, they could, it's traumatizing to be thrown on the ground like that by federal agents, potentially sent to jail before you can be released. I talked to a Venezuelan delivery driver. He's fully legal status, was basically too scared to leave his house for the first week or so after this federalization happened. Couldn't make any money, right? We had to go, we're dropping off groceries for him. He was just like, what am I supposed to do right now? If I go out and do my job, they're gonna arrest me even though I'm legal. If I don't do my job, I'm not gonna make any money. And so that's the situation we're putting people in. And you mentioned the additional federal emergency. I think just one thing to be clear about is that is illegal. It is a violation of the law for the president to unilaterally declare another emergency without Congress's approval. The law is clear. You have 30 days, and then you have to get congressional approval to extend. And the president can try to do whatever he wants, but it is not legal for him to unilaterally declare another emergency. And regardless of whatever the president is threatening, the number one thing we know is that MPD cannot be used to support and participate in the racial profiling, harassment, and kidnapping of the Latino community here in DC. We cannot be using MPD to do that without some sort of federal requirement to do so. And so the president can say whatever he wants. At the end of the day, that's the values we need to stick to.
Okay. From the Washington Post. Yesterday, Donna Brazil, sorry, I'm going to say this wrong.
Donna Brazil.
Brazil urged Delegate Norton not to run for re-election. Do you think Norton should run for re-election? Would you support her re-election bid?
Well, it seems like she's running. It seems like she's running. She said it several times. I take her at her word, so I guess we'll see what happens. I don't know who's going to run against her exactly. And we'll see what the field is going to shape up to be. I think there's still a lot of time. So I'm going to just see what happens.
Yeah, so I've said on the record before that no one can make this decision for Representative Norton but herself. I will say that knowing Ms. Brazil and her history, I know that that was a very difficult op-ed for her to write. And for her to get to that point, she felt like she had no other options. And I think, though, when we look about, and it's not just for DC. This morning when I left the House, there was a hearing on in the Senate, and I saw Mr. Grassley, and I was like, all right. There are a number of members who feel like they are the only one who can do the job on both sides. And I feel like this moment that we are in on both sides is calling for new voices, new leadership, building a bench, building a pipeline, and allowing more folks to come into the space to participate and serve their communities in a way that they find. And so, as you said, we'll see what happens.
Yeah. And I'll just say her staff does a great job. I have a great relationship with her staff and her team, and they really try their hardest to support the people of DC.
Question from WJLA for both of you. Why is 24 not too old for young people to receive a reduced sentence? Shouldn't the council have lowered the age before this?
Okay, so this is with reference to the Youth Rehabilitation Act. So some history. The Youth Rehabilitation Act has existed since 1985 in the District of Columbia, which allows for judges to have discretion in terms of sentences when you're dealing with a juvenile, a young person who has been tried in a different place. There have been lots of misconceptions about the YRA, and what we know from the data is that when there is a YRA-related offense that carries a mandatory minimum, even though the judges have discretion to give lower, they are actually giving the mandatory minimum in 80% of the cases. So this idea that the YRA has led to somehow this increased amount of violence and crime in the district is simply not true. And I wasn't on the council when the decision was made to change the age from 18 and then move it up to 24. But what we know from the brain science data, the brain science research, the science, and I think, Eileen, you are a science reporter or have a science reporting background, is that a person's brain is not fully formed until they're age 24, 25. And so I believe that the council at that time was trying to make that adjustment to reflect what we know in terms of brain science and also how that fits into decision making, impulsive control, and all of these different things that have come into it. I will also add, though, that we know from the data from the individuals who have been granted YRA sentencing between 18 and 24 years old, that the recidivism rates for those individuals is not high. It's actually quite low, meaning that YRA has worked. You did something, it's usually, in many cases, it's your first time offense, your first involvement with the criminal justice system. And the judge is looking at the totality of the context of what happened in that event and is choosing to make a reduction or not. So once again, that's kind of where I would say, right? I think there is this perception that the YRA is somehow the reason for all of this juvenile crime, when in fact the evidence actually does not bear that out.
Yeah, I mean, just to piggyback onto that, what we've seen from the data is that it's working. And I'm somebody who believes in data-based decision-making. I think Councilmember Henderson is as well. And we in DC, we actually have to solve the problem, right? Because we're the ones who are the victims of crime if we don't solve the problem. Members of Congress, they can get headlines and they can, they work in a fortress, basically. They can come in and out. It doesn't really matter to them whether we actually solve the problem at the end of the day. And this is exactly why we shouldn't have Congress legislating on local laws for DC, because they don't know what works and what doesn't work for Washington, DC. Councilmember Henderson and her colleagues are the ones on the ground who sees what works and what doesn't work. And so I guess I don't understand why Congress thinks they can do better, and especially why a Democrat in Congress would support this Trump takeover of DC and overturn the will of the people of DC and instead support the president's agenda for Washington, DC. And I mean, if I were a voter who helped elect a Democratic member of Congress, maybe fundraise for them or knocked on doors for them, told my friends and family to vote for them, I would be wondering, why is this member thinking about voting to support President Trump's attack on DC? That's not what I voted for them to do. I voted for this member to be a check and balance on the president, and yet here they are advancing the president's agenda. And you have some members, Democratic members, who are going to be taking this vote either now or in the future, who are thinking running for president, who are interested in being a vice presidential nominee, who are themselves already on thin ice with some of their voters and Democratic voters. And is this something that they want to have on their record as voting to support President Trump's takeover of Washington, D.C. When they are running in a Democratic primary? Do they want for people to have to bring that up and say, why did you vote with President Trump? We've elected you to be a check and balance on the president, and here you are advancing his agenda and supporting his authoritarian takeover of Washington, D.C. And so I think that's the question for members of Congress as they're deciding how to vote.
Someone writes, how do you both respond to critics who say DC lacks the population or economic base to justify statehood?
Okay, so yeah, I get this question a lot. So there's two states that are smaller than Washington, D.C., Vermont and Wyoming. We are about the same size as Alaska. If those states can be states, there's no reason Washington, D.C. cannot be a state. There is no size requirement to be a state in the U.S. Constitution. If there was, then we would meet it because we have more people than Vermont and Wyoming. At the end of the day, there are more than 700,000 people who live in Washington, D.C., who pay taxes, who fight in our wars, and who deserve the birthright granted to every single citizen of this country, which is to have a representative in the U.S. Congress advocating for their interests. That is just common sense, and it is so un-American that we are denying any American citizen the rights of representation in the U.S. Congress. And it matters because we're seeing right now why it matters. We are facing these unprecedented attacks on our rights and on our sovereignty and our democracy because we're not a state. No other jurisdiction has to deal with the problems, these obstacles that we're facing, and it's wrong from a moral standpoint, and it also has real world consequences. I mean, people die because we are not a state. We don't have enough judges because we are not a state, and that means we don't have enough prosecutors. People die for that reason. We have a U.S. attorney who has decided to just stop prosecuting our law on carrying of long guns in public and of carrying of large capacity magazines in public. I actually have a friend who worked on that large capacity magazine lawsuit, spent many years of his life defending it successfully, and then the prosecutor just says, yeah, we're not going to enforce that law anymore. And people will die because of that, right? And the one thing I'll say about January 6th is that no one shot at an officer on January 6th. People did bring guns, but it wasn't that many, and they weren't used. If you have another January 6th, and now the U.S. Attorney has made it clear we are not prosecuting you if you're carrying a long gun, whether or not you have a permit for it, then I worry what that could mean for the future of our democracy. That people are allowed to carry weapons now openly in the Capitol or in the capital city of the United States, and the police can't do anything about it because there's a presumption that it's legal to carry a long gun in D.C. Or not legal, that it's not going to be enforced, let me put it that way. And so regardless of the size, regardless of whatever you want to say, it is immoral and it is unethical to deny 700,000 plus American citizens the right to vote. That's what it comes down to at the end of the day.
I think he sort of said it correctly, but I also think you have to I have to chuckle at it because I strongly believe if the demographics of the District of Columbia were different, we wouldn't be having this argument, right? We would not be having this argument if this wasn't a, what I call a beautiful cultural mix that happens here, or a diverse community that is here. We would not be having this conversation, or people suggesting that. I think there was one member of Congress who said, well, you guys can't possibly be a state because you don't have a car dealership. Where is that a requirement anywhere in the Constitution that to be a state you have to have a car dealership? Economically speaking, and I want to speak to that because I think that is, again, a misconception. The DC budget is only about a quarter of it is from federal funding. And much of that federal funding is the same formula funds that every other state avails themselves to from all of the various agencies, whether it be on highway funds or DOT, Medicaid, SNAP, WIC, et cetera. And so, there's some functions for which DC is treated like a state in terms of these federal granting. But then on other things, they're like, no, you're too small. No, you're under our thumb type of deal. I will just tell you, I was on the Hill yesterday. And there's something a little sort of defeating when you have to go into a state's office and then they'll ask you, oh, what city are you from in our state? And you say, no, I'm not. Nope, I'm from DC. And they kind of give you this very puzzled look. And I have to then give you an explanation of why I'm here to talk to you because you're about to vote on a series of bills that are about DC. So yes, you have to take time away from your constituents and these other jurisdictions who are calling you. And I need you to talk to me because I need to tell you about this bill that is related only to the District of Columbia. To get these offices to actually fully care, it doesn't always compute for them. Like, why do we care about what's going on in DC? And you have to sort of explain it to them. So I welcome the opportunity for statehood, and I don't then have to go knock on doors of other offices and have them take our calls.
I wanted to quickly ask a question about DOGE. How is DC coping with the mass layoffs of federal workers?
I mean, so we're under a multi-pronged assault here in Washington, D.C. They are coming after our federal workers. Then they come after our Latino community, our immigrant community, and now they're coming after our criminal justice laws. And so the president, let me just start out by saying that DOGE has been a disaster for Washington, D.C. The president keeps on talking about, D.C. needs to fight crime more, needs to do X, Y, Z more. And then what happens? They fire a large portion of our workforce, and that means that we have less tax revenue coming in, which means we have less money to hire police officers and fund all the other criminal justice priorities that we would need to fund to reduce crime. And then you have this immigration raids. So restaurant workers are too scared to come into work. And you're having restaurant sales down, and that means less restaurants go out of business, which also means less tax revenue for the people of DC. My suggestion, if the president wants us to do more to fight crime, stop firing the patriotic federal workers who are just trying to make our air cleaner, our streets safer, our food more healthy, and give them their jobs back, and then let us have a workforce that can then contribute to our tax base that can let us fund our programs that we need to fight crime. And so yes, DOGE has been a huge disaster for Washington, D.C. I mean, Councilmember Henderson can speak a little bit more to the specifics, but a lot of people have lost their jobs. We're facing a mini recession here in Washington, D.C. I've seen stats showing that we're already losing jobs, and we have the highest job loss percentage as a percentage of any jurisdiction, other state/jurisdiction in the country. And so it is a serious problem.
Yeah, I mean, I think DOGE has certainly impacted the DMV region. I'm on the Metropolitan Councils of Governments, which is about the counties that are in our area. And in terms of the number of federal workers, Northern Virginia has more than us, but it certainly has impacted us. In particular, it has impacted a lot of Black families and Black women in particular, who in the District of Columbia for a long time, working for the federal government was sort of your pathway to the middle class. It was like the good, stable government job, and now that is gone for a lot of individuals. The other week, I was in Georgetown at a store and started talking to the cashier, and she was talking about, oh my gosh, this is much more work than my last job in terms of like physically taxing. And she told me that she had worked at Department of Homeland Security, and she was part of the group that had been laid off, and now she is working at a TJ Maxx. She was at Homeland Security since it started, right? When W. Bush was in office. And so you think about that in terms of you had decades of stability in your job, you were able to have this professional growth, and then in one fell swoop, you're just sort of moved out. And now in the area trying to look for other work, well, you have a lot of white collar individuals who have degrees and otherwise who are facing that. So it's hit us pretty hard economically speaking, and not just in terms of tax revenues, but also in foot traffic. National Press Club, we're downtown, 14th Street for those who are watching from home. But a lot of the restaurants and coffee shops and dry cleaners, like some people don't think about the other parts of the fabric and social economy that makes up when you have city workers like we do. And so that has certainly been a hit. But I think overall, in terms of the impact, because a lot of people will say, well, maybe that was going to happen with or without like DOGE. All right, in December of 2024, we received a revenue estimate from our chief financial officer about where revenues were going for the district. They were not growing in terms of massive surpluses, but we were on a steady trajectory in terms of our recovery from the pandemic. Fast forward to February of 2025, the next revenue estimate, and like the ground is falling out. Not only is the ground falling out, but I've got credit bureau agencies that are now taking us from a AAA bond rating for the city to now we're on watch lists. The only thing that happened between December and February was January 20th and everything that sort of took place from there, right? Credit agencies were putting our credit on a warning, not because of anything the city did. And that's the misconception. A lot of people are like, well, the city needs to put its finances together. No, we're good. We have been good for a very long time. But they were putting us on the warning list because they didn't know what was going to happen with Medicaid and what was going to happen with healthcare. And so that's always the sort of frustrating thing. And then you add to that, Congress took away $1 billion of our local money in the middle of the fiscal year and said, figure it out. The House still has not voted on that bill, by the way. The fiscal year ends on September 30th, but they still have time. So it has certainly had an economic impact. And interestingly enough, for a lot of these federal agencies, they have had to hire some people back because they realized you were firing indiscriminately. And now you actually need people for those jobs to serve Americans.
Yeah. They need that institutional knowledge.
That too.
Okay. Before I ask the final question, let me take a moment to thank the Headliners team, Chair Jen Judson, and other members who assisted with this event, as well as Club Executive Director Didier Saji, and the entire club staff, including Cecily Scott Martin, for making this possible. Thank you to our audience for being here online and in person. Now let me present you with our National Press Club mugs.
Oh, wow, I didn't realize we were getting mugs.
Yeah.
I love this.
Awesome.
Thank you.
As a small token of our thank you for coming and talking to us.
Thank you.
And then now for our final question. If DC became the 51st state tomorrow, what would you want it to be called?
So I actually do like Douglas Commonwealth. I know that there's like a variety of opinions on this. I'm not gonna make a whole stink about this. It can be Washington Douglas Commonwealth. I think Douglas Commonwealth is a little bit cleaner, personally. I know that some people actually have very strong opinions on this in the statehood community. I like Douglas Commonwealth. Washington Douglas Commonwealth. I think that's good too.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, Douglas Commonwealth, we sort of went through a process, but at the end of the day, and we've learned this from like Twitter, right? You were born as Twitter. I know you changed your company, but I'm still gonna call you Twitter, and it's still a tweet. We were born as Washington, D.C., and we're gonna be D.C. till the end of time.
Okay, excellent. Thank you very much for coming and talking to us.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for having us.
It's very nice to meet you.
Yeah.